Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Strider.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please raise that for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard. Mr. Johnston. Ms. Fineo.
Here.
Mr. Menuda. Here. Ms. Pocock. Here. Mr. Strider. Here. Mr. Tabano.
Here.
Mr. Walker. Ms. Ambito.
Here. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose. Matter made confidential under FERPA, employment history of particular individuals, matters leading to the employment of particular individuals, the review of programs and placements of students with disabilities, and collective bargaining under the Taylor Law, NTA, CSEA, NASA, and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Roll call, please.
Mr. Johnston. Ms. Fineo.
Yes.
Mr. Menuda.
Yes.
Ms. Pocock. Mr. Strider.
Yes.
Mr. Tabano.
Yes.
Ms. Ambito.
Yes. Move a return of 7. I'm going to turn this over to our superintendent, Dr. Padilla.
Good evening, Madam President and members of the board, central office, and to our audience. Good evening and welcome. It is my absolute privilege tonight to kick off our second bond workshop. And so what we'd like to do this evening is to talk about where we're at. The committee met 2 times since our last. Always start with what's important, right? There you go, Madam President. Thank you. All right, so I'll circle back to the bond in a second, but this evening we're here to recognize our amazing scholars. Is Ms. Brown here? Yeah. Ms. Teresa Brown, come on up.
You had me worried there for a minute.
I'm kind of focused right now.
Good evening, my name is Teresa Brown, and I'm the Director of Fine and Performing Arts for the district, which is the best job. So, tonight it's my pleasure to recognize some of our students. The New York State is divided into 15 regional zones for NYSMA, which is New York State School Music Association. These zones are represented geographical areas within the state, and also take into account our student populations within the zones. As one of the opportunities to celebrate the regional talent and achievements in music education, there is an annual Area All-State Music Festival. Students must demonstrate achievement as evidenced by their NYSMA solo adjudications, as well as receive recommendations from their music educator, principal, and director in order to be considered. Once accepted, the students and teachers prepare for the regional festival. This year's festival was held at Tri-Valley Central School on November 17th and 18th. At this time, I would like to recognize those students who represented the Newburgh and Large City School District. When I call your name, if you could come on up and receive your certificate, and then remain up for a picture. Christiana Mia. Supriya Nathan. Jeremy Kurtz. Abigail Hope. Jackson Galati. Therese Fisher. Greg Fisher. Rebecca Ferguson. Olivia Fava. Lane Dewell, Spencer Conti, Allie Benedict, and Elizabeth Clark. I'd also like to recognize the family and the music educators who continue to support these students. Ms. Monica Guido and Ms. Jillian Cassie are here with us as well, so let's give them a round of applause. You gotta smile because the parents are taking here. Thank you very much. Our second recognition, and our final recognition, is for the All-National Chorus. The All-National Honor Ensembles, the performers represent collaboration and creativity in its highest musical form. They consist of a concert band, symphony orchestra, mixed choir, and jazz ensemble. The students are chosen through an audition process. The eligible students have qualified for their state-level honor ensemble program and compete against top students for a spot in these national honor ensembles. Selected students rehearse a challenge repertoire in preparation for performing under the baton of 5 of the most prominent conductors in the United States. All of these conductors have received top honors in their field and spent several days rehearsing with the students before the concert. This year, we recognize a student who exemplifies the true meaning of a well-rounded scholar. Whether she is providing her research-based testimony at a Senate forum, being accepted into all-county, area all-state, or all-eastern chorus, or qualifying as a National Merit Scholar recipient, her commitment to her education, family, and community cannot be mistaken. Please join me in recognizing Supriya Makeup for her participation in the 2017 All-National Chorus. Ms. Cassie, would you like to join me? Congratulations to our scholars.
I'm going to ask to table 2.2, just because I feel it's important to have our National Teacher of the Year here. And so we'll make sure that gets on our next agenda. So let's proceed with the workshop. Board members, in front of you, you have a packet. This is a revised packet for our audience. It's going to be displayed up on the board. Board members, in addition to your packet, you have materials such as highlighters and a pencil. And you still should have the norms that we went over last time. If you want to start off by publicly thanking the committee again, I can't stress enough the amount of time this committee spent grappling with real issues and really keeping at the core of students and what's best for our district down the road. And this has always been about how to become future ready now, right? And so this forward thinking ultimately resulted in some really dynamic designs and scopes. And so I'm going to start off by highlighting. So the way we're going to structure this, we're going to keep with what we did last time in terms of protocol. So we'll go over a particular design, and then we'll open the floor up for a discussion, right? And so that's a conversation among the board regarding what's being presented. Tonight, we'll heavily focus on option 2, but before we get to option 2, I need to highlight that we're going to also present a revised option 1. So based on what was discussed last time, the committee went back and said, okay, based on that particular board discussion, let's put our minds back together, let's make this even more robust. And as a result, some new buildings were added to option 1. Right? Some key distinctions, and there's a slide that will highlight financially the distinctions between option 1 and option 2. But quickly, option 1 falls within our bonding capacity and only requires a simple majority. Option 2 exceeds our bonding capacity and requires a supermajority. And we'll get into more of the differences later. So for option 1, the left-hand side, you'll see the scope that wasn't changed from the first presentation. I'll just give you a minute to look that over. And then you'll also see on the right-hand side the scope that was changed and or added for option 1. So with option 1, we went back to the table and we're adding 2 more schools, specifically Meadow Hill and Temple Hill. And you'll see in a second when we look at those particular scopes, they primarily focus on classrooms. And that's important, right? Because when we talk about how much aid we would qualify for, because we're focusing on classrooms, that's going to matter greatly. So Fostertown, we're going to highlight this because there was a conversation about this and at our last board meeting. And 2, there's been a change a slight change to the scope. So I'm going to have Chris come up and we'll do this side by side, but if you can highlight those key differences for our board members, please.
So this one's basic and simple. There were some questions about the grade around the addition. You see here on the back side of the building. We do have a large grade change on this side of the building, so that allowed us to have a storage space on the lower level of the building. So that's highlighted here to show that there will be a storage space below the classroom addition. So that's the only change that's noted on Fostertown. And again, building condition survey items stayed the same. Net classroom gain here is 5. So that helps deal with issues, no art, music on a cart, all the things we talked about at last presentation.
Okay, so at this point for Fostertown, we'd like to open up the floor to our board members for discussion. Again, you've heard most of it, but we wanted to make sure we were clear of the change.
Any questions or discussion on Fostertown? Mr. Strudar.
I noticed that the item here says select building condition survey priority 1 items. What is that number? And if you were to handle all of the priority 1 items at Fostertown School, what would be the cost of that?
All right, Lou, do you have that information?
I have the total for Fostertown on priority 1 is $373,000. I do not have the total for priorities 1 through 5.
So that 373 just reflects items that are being addressed,
The priority ones.
the priority ones that are being addressed.
So all priority 1 at Fostertown is more than $373,000?
There's priorities 1 through 5, which is part of the 5-year building condition survey. So it's, right now we focused on priority 1 across all the buildings.
Okay, because the breakdown here says select. I just want to make sure, so it's total building condition priority 1 items are being addressed in this number?
It's a portion of the priority ones.
Okay,
It's
so
not the entire priority one.
So Mr. Sternheim would like to know what other priority 1 items are there and what's that cost?
yeah, I want to break down for every single school. I want to make sure we address every priority 1 item in this capital bond.
So, okay, so I think that's important, and we're writing that down. I don't want to skip ahead too fast, but does option 2 address more priority 1 items?
Not all of them.
Okay.
Mr. Muda has a question.
So Mr. Strudiron raised a good question as to all of the priority items. If we were to handle all the priority items that we saw in the BCS, what would that cost us?
We'll have to get that number to you, right? I don't have that number for you.
Can we have that back further?
Yeah, I got two more.
All right, thank you. So, we'll put that in the week.
Can I just follow that up real quick?
Okay.
So, if we were to address all the priority items, would that be above or below our bonding capacity?
So definitely above,
Definitely above.
definitely.
Just to address all priority items 1 through 5. So we'd be over the bonding capacity at this point.
Yeah.
Huh?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know about priority one items for all the schools. That should be below the bonding capacity. So we just did priority ones for every school to make sure health and safety are priority one, I believe.
They're part, I don't want to misspeak, but they're basically parsed out as to level of importance. Not only their health and safety, but the level of maybe decay or replacement period, what have you. But, you know, they've been identified by the building condition survey, so they are all building condition survey items. Eventually, we want to escalate those to the future. So it's an ever-moving target, if you will.
Well, we can get that information to the board. And let me just, tonight is a workshop, it's a conversation. I am not formally making any recommendations tonight. So as questions come up such as this, you know, we have several people taking notes and we'll be sure to follow up. In January is when I plan to make a formal recommendation to the board.
Are there any other questions or comments on Foster Town Board members?
So if I'm correct, before we move forward, Mr. Stradine, you're asking for the total cost of priority one items for every building. That's what you would like to see.
Including Chestnut, all the buildings.
All priority one for every building.
I don't believe any of the option 1 or 2 addresses Chestnut or, you know, top story.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm asking for all. So he's asking for priority 1, I'm asking for all.
All right, so we'll, thank you. Okay, so next school, and again, the reason why this is being highlighted is because this was not part of the original option 1, but it is now in the revised version. And so Meadow Hill, and the focus here is on additional classrooms, and you have the schematic in your packets. These are the same photos that we provided in the building conditions survey to the committee. Items for the scope of work for this particular option. And now I'll open the floor up.
Are there, excuse me, board members, are there any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Sure. Are the classrooms designated for a specific purpose?
So yes, tech spaces that Meadow Hill desperately needs. You'll see the same for Temple Hill, as well as special ed.
Are there any other questions on Meadow Hill? Yes, Mr. Stradine.
Just in general, when you're adding new classroom space, is it to reduce the class size or increase capacity of the building?
Depending on the building, right? So specifically for Meadow and Temple, they need bigger tech spaces. And then Meadow also has a new special ed program at their particular building. Mr. Forget, I don't believe we have anyone on a cart at Meadow Hill, but I want to confirm that. Okay. So OTPT, tech, special ed, and what's being proposed here is 4 additional classrooms, right?
Go ahead, Mr. Stradine.
As a follow-up to that, have you looked into the possibility of the cost for either staffing changes, furniture, maintenance costs, so we can have an idea of what it would cost, say the building was completed, what it's going to cost to have, you know, additional, say, 4 or 8 people in a building? Yeah, have you done any of those calculations yet? Just rough?
Well, for furniture, Mr. Kern has already reported that all furniture will not be part of the capital bond, and he gave an explanation of that last time. It's not cost effective to make it part of the bond, and so we're gonna be looking at a plan within the general fund budget for, specifically for furniture. At this point, we are not anticipating, unless our enrollment goes up, we're not anticipating the need to hire new personnel. So we're not, in our discussion, we haven't, that hasn't come up as something that it's always something we're monitoring, but as a part of Meadow Hill, we're not seeking to increase staff.
Mr. Menuda?
Just for clarification, what is our average class size?
For
Number of students per
across
class?
the district or at Meadow?
I guess probably across the district or Meadow, whichever is clever.
Okay. We'll pull that up in a second.
Anybody else have any other questions on Meadow Hill while we're researching that number?
All right, so Mr. Fortune, when that does come up, don't just interrupt, and we'll share that out. So Temple Hill, you know, is a sister school, and so buildings are designed similarly. And so we're again looking for the same space at Temple.
Board members, questions or comments on Temple Hill? Yes?
I'm sorry, let's go back to Meadow Hill for one item. The pre-K center, that was removed from the plans. Is that because it's not a mandated program, or what exactly was the thought process for removing the pre-K center?
I mean, ultimately, it became, as you remember, it was something that we believed in. But when you look at our current buildings and what we're able to do and what we need to do, that happened to be one particular project that didn't make the cutting block. Because I believe we were estimating close to 19, 20 million just for a new pre-K center. We thought those monies would have been better utilized in our existing buildings. It's not to say, however, that we couldn't take the same concept down the road and centralize it. But in terms of building a new facility just for pre-K at this time, we don't see that as possible in option one, given our constraints.
Is that, if it was in this bond, would that be an aidable construction cost? Does it say educational?
So it's classroom space, a
Is it
similar,
a brand new building, or is
it would be a brand new building.
It would be similar to the
The high
high school, and then there would be some spaces that aren't aidable, like the open spaces, so you wouldn't get 100% aidability on it.
So it may cost $10 million to build a $20 million building. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question
Yep,
about
go ahead.
Temple Hill and Meadow Hill? Is this a 2-floor addition or is it a 1-floor addition on each building? Because that has an upper and lower level.
Right now it's 1 floor. The ability to be built up.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Forger, go ahead.
K-5 district average class size is 22.4. 6-8 average class size is 21, and that's as of 11/15, and I don't have the high school.
Go ahead, Mr. Menuda.
So we have sister schools, Temple Hill, Meadow Hill. Do they also have sister programs? So they're both teaching the same things?
So, go ahead, Mr. Forger.
I believe Mrs. Belize can respond to that. I think the only difference is at the middle level, the science is a different science for the Regents exam.
Well, actually, this year, they're all the same.
Would you mind?
This year, the science is the same across the district.
Beautiful.
And Meadow also has,
The special ed program at Meadow.
The uniqueness of Meadow Hill is the smaller class size for the students with disabilities population that's there, the autistic population.
Any other board members, any other questions on Meadow or Temple Hill? Thank you.
Okay, NFA Main, we're putting this back up for discussion because there's been some change, and so we want to make sure that's reflected. So here you can see a much needed renovation to the locker rooms for both females and males, and a renovated main library here. We're going to continue with the proposed item of virtual reality lab, planetarium, and then here you can see the scope of work specifically for NFA Main and the increase of that cost.
Board members, questions or comments on NFA Main? Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Could someone say a little bit more about the plans for the planetarium? Would the dome continue to exist, and would it be used in some way?
Right now, the concept is to go to a virtual reality lab so that the dome would effectively remain, that space would be renovated, but the dome would not be necessary in its traditional function because it would be in a VR setting, virtual reality setting. So you have the flexibility to be used as a planetarium with VR glasses, but could also have the ability to be used for other VR purposes.
Mr. Johnson.
Is there any awareness of other schools having a planetarium and how they might use that? It seems kind of a shame to not use it for its intended purpose. It's very impressive, and I can recall driving into the NFA parking lot with another high schooler in our car, and they said, "Wow, you guys have a planetarium." And we said, "Yeah, it's kind of there, and it isn't used that much." And I know I'm aware that there are grants out there to specifically support planetariums and that kind of science activity. It seems kind of a shame to use that space for a VR lab where the characteristics of the space are not as significant.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. It is unique that you have a planetarium. Most schools don't. The space itself the primary purpose will still be a planetarium. It's just that the technology that's in that space is extremely obsolete. So we're trying to repurpose the space to be more future ready using current technology, with the primary purpose of it being a planetarium. It's just that the technology affords you to use it for other purposes if you so desire.
So in this one, the pool remains where it is?
So
And it's
that
going to be renovated?
That's correct. That is one of the major changes from the previous option one. We're recommending to keep the pool in its current location and make the necessary repairs. And that would be much cheaper to do it that way.
And that also would be cleaning up the locker rooms that are down there?
Oh, definitely.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Johnston?
So it looks like the auto space were renovated into a library. Would the existing library continue to exist in its space as well?
Yeah, so this is a proposal to have two libraries. That's been a concern that I've heard now for quite a bit of time, that everyone has to go to one particular, one end of the building. And the current library needs a major overhaul to bring it into the 21st century. But given that we're recommending moving the CTE spaces out, some of those spaces are quite large and could be used for a much needed second library for the building.
Mr. Menuda?
You mentioned the library. How do you split a library? You have duplication of all the same subject matter, or you have some subject matter in one library and some in the other? And my question with regard to the pool is, will we still be on a chlorinated system, or are we going to go with, ozone and salt, et cetera, so we can get away from the chlorine production and all of the irritation that has on our students.
I would ask for a recommendation from the board. I certainly can't speak on that subject matter, but I can research it for sure. Is there a preference?
Having swam myself, the preference would not be to have chlorine, would be to not have chlorine, rather.
Mr. Tabana?
I have a question. Where are you going to put the second library? What would be the location?
So it's in the current auto repair part of the building, in the lower level.
Where the auto shop is now, you put the library? In the bottom of it?
Won't be as big as the main library, but nonetheless, it would be an additional space.
But why would you have two libraries? The expenses would be double. You need 2 librarians in each library. You need staff. Why would you, why not one library? One that it says beautiful, it's been there for years. It's a place where students will go and use a study hall, use the computers. So I think it would be a waste of money to have 2 libraries.
So it's an open space for us to be able to do a number of things in. So if it's not a library, certainly we could, have the committee review that and see if there's a better purpose in this, So we'll certainly put that on the table.
Board members, any other? Yes, Mr.
The greenhouse, are there going to be any renovations to the greenhouse?
The greenhouse?
They show a picture of the greenhouse.
It's on part of the BCS. Renovate that space.
Thank you.
Mr. Menuda?
With respect to the locker rooms, does that include the women's Section 9 locker rooms that were not able to be used as a Section 9 locker room under the last renovation?
So we got an updated report that the newest locker room is being used. Primarily for when there's competitions.
Okay, so the last time I was there, it was being used to store a bunch of junk. But my understanding of that was that it was designed as a Section 9, supposed to be constructed as a Section 9 locker room, but at the end of the day, when it was finally constructed, it didn't meet the Section 9 requirements, and therefore could not be used for such required events. So my question is, since that's on the table and been there since I've come onto the board and before that, is that space being renovated to be utilized in its proper use, number one, and number two, since we've already spent $650,000 on that back then, will we be receiving money back from anybody for their lack thereof of improper design and implementation?
So all I can say is it's currently being used, and it's being used by female teams in our district and in other districts when there are competitions. So I completely understand, because I believe my first year when I went there, I saw it as a storage space. But as of today, it's being used.
To support what Mr. Menuda said, there are some issues there with the showers and things like that that I don't think have been rectified. So you have cause to be asking that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on NFA Maine?
Okay, thank you. Student Success Center and new high school proposal. So here, Ms. Monet already kind of pointed out that the biggest change here is taking out the pool. The original design had a 6-lane track. This would be an 8-lane track. And there's a major savings as a result of keeping the pool in its current location. Outside of that, are there any other significant changes? All right, so those two are the two biggest. So again, it's imperative to highlight how the facilities will be used. So at that point, I'll open the floor up.
Questions or comments? Mr. Menuda, come on, you have something to ask.
Okay, so, completely about the educational component of this. I believe we're in the business to educate, right? So, that's key. We're putting $95 million into one campus. That's half the budget. And to that extent, I have a hard time with seeing that number and that it's being used on one campus when all of the other schools, well, we've seen the BCS and we know that it's near its max bonding capacity just to accomplish those items, just to bring our schools into that complete total compliance. We also discussed, and I'm not sure if that's part of this, and forgive me because I don't recall from our last meeting, whether we were including air conditioning throughout the building or not in this. So there's quite a few things here. I just don't see the need for a enclosed multi-use track and court for a sports program. And, you know, we're not landlords. We're not in the business of receiving income and money. We're in the business to educate. So those are my concerns with the current layout. Lastly, I have asked 3 times, this will be my 4th, to have a geotechnical engineer brought to the meeting so that we can understand what's going on this property. There is either a fault line or an underground stream that runs under it. There's a series of pilings under the one building, and that's why the backspace was constructed the way it was back in the 80s. So I would like that brought to the forefront. The other item I'd like to brought to the forefront, publicly speaking, I want a mechanical engineer to come in and tell us what is or is not needed with regard to air conditioning the entire building so that we can make a decision. And I'd like that professional present. Thank you.
Ms. Purvis, would you have a comment?
Well, yeah, just a little comment. As we discussed at our meeting at length last Friday and before that, this is basically not one high school, this is several programs. NFA North being there, Excelsior being there, NFA West being on this site, and all the new all the CTE centers, current, the CTE classes current, and those at NFA and also NFA Maine, and also maybe some additional CTE. So I think this is educational. I think it does meet the needs of the students. The physical education part of this will be used by students in all 3 of those centers. And I know we're not in the business of being event planners, but this is also a revenue maker. As far as the 8-lane track, you don't have to go to West Point to practice. Other schools can come to us to practice. We would be available for state events. We would be available there for AAU events. This will bring revenue to the district and specifically to help defer any future costs as far as our sports programs. So I think it's a win-win situation. And someone said the other day, oh, what about the people in the district? Well, I foresee something like a senior citizen day every month where senior citizens can come to that center, go down to the culinary, go down to the cosmetology and get a haircut, get their nails done, They could bring the car in and get the car oil changed, and we could open up the room for physical fitness, and they could have a little workout once a month for senior citizens. There's a vast number of things that we can do for our community as well as the students in our buildings. And students can be ambassadors for our district. And as someone said, I think it was Mr. Larkin said yesterday, we have a number of graduates from our district that are very well-to-do today and very successful. And we've talked about having an alumni fundraiser or alumni association for our district that we could also have money going in towards this center. That many that I've talked to already are very willing to support our center, much like college campuses are supported by different people that are philanthropists. So I think this is a win-win for the district, and I think it's very long overdue. I think Newburgh Free Academy, Newburgh School District is one of the best kept secrets in New York State as far as producing and putting out successful people. And I think it's about time that we celebrate this. And if we're going to celebrate it with a diamond like we have here, then let's go for it. If the people vote against it, so be it. But I think we need to put something out there for these students, and I think it would do nothing but enhance Newburgh Free Academy, the name, and also the district. Thank you.
So,
I do have a comment. On the NFA, the New North building, the administration building is way off to the right-hand side. The perception is that they're so far away from the student areas. So perhaps to flip-flop music and technology areas with administration would be more student-friendly, more job-friendly for the administrators to be there on site with the teachers and with the kids, rather than to be way far away, because that's not the perception that I would like to see.
point noted, thank you. I think the only other thing I would include here, certainly the why around such a big part of the budget is allocated here. And so the committee certainly spent time talking about that. And so one significant why is that this would touch every student in the district, right? So everyone ends up here and has an opportunity to take advantage of the programs. And so for that reason, that's one significant justification for why a good chunk of the budget would be allocated to this particular project.
Mr. Stritter, you had a comment?
I'm looking at the contour lines on this map. You have about a 50-foot elevation difference from where the existing welding area is to the top of the hill where the bus loop is. How many stories is the New North?
So that'll be a 3-story building on the existing NFA main side. So it is a multi-story building.
So you're going to have the third floor going to be the entrance of the school for the bus. And so that entire face of that building, other than the top floor, will be below ground. And you have,
Predominantly, yes.
Then I have a real problem then isolating administration on the top floor, because your middle and bottom floors then don't have any administrative offices there.
Yeah, so the plans, these are preliminary. We still have to program with admin and staff to allocate the exact location of spaces at this point, but that is a point noted. We can adjust locations when we get into program.
I think we saw the faultiness when we put that big new building in the back of NFA, and there are no administrative offices there. It's very hard to monitor that. Mr. Stronach.
so as far as drainage, do you know if there's a lot of runoff on that building? Because if you're going to put a building up against a 50-foot drop, you're going to have a lot of water coming out of it.
So this entire site will have to have a stormwater management plan. It'll have to have a complete stormwater design associated with it. So the contours that are currently there and the way it currently drains would be modified as a part of the project. And it'd also be part of our geotech study, so back to the point about the geotech.
Mr. Menuda?
So to Mr. Stridar's standpoint, this plan that we're looking at right now is no better than a bubble diagram. It's got nothing underneath it with respect to the topography, geology. It's a flat piece of paper, but it's not a flat site. We really need to put a lot more thought into this, on this particular subject. Parking area up top, where that belongs, is that the best location for it? So it's basically a placement diagram and not much more. So it's really more about program and looking at this rather than will this work in this location? We won't know for a long time.
Mr. Stradar?
Is it required for the state ed to get a stormwater management plan for any new construction?
Yes, so that's part of the environmental review process. Once we do that environmental review process, a project of this magnitude would require a stormwater management plan, and that is required to get a permit through SED.
Are you required to go to the city of Newburgh for any changes to traffic patterns?
That'd be part of a traffic study. It's part of the environmental review process as well, seeker.
Do you have to go to planning board for that, or is it just a submittal for their knowledge?
So as a school district, you're not required to go through local review of a planning board, but you do have to do a traffic study for a project of this magnitude to address those issues. So that's part of the seeker process.
Board members, any other questions or comments on the Student Success Center and the new high school? Yes, Mr. Stradar?
Just for layout purposes, I think it would be better to have, if you want to put a new north building, farther up, maybe towards that street. Because to build something like this, keep the CTE. I really like the CTE, the new CTE buildings, but to have north somehow farther up that hill, maybe where the existing, I don't know, that house is, whatever that's called. Okay. Up in that area. So maybe take that building and put it up between the parking and the.
Kind of where the baseball field is.
Well, no, where the, in between the new track and the parking, so you put it up here, and that way when your bus comes in, you're right in front of the building. Rather than keep it down here on this hill, you put slope, because you're gonna have all that water, you're gonna have a flood area up here.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Go ahead, Mr. Menuda?
To that point, we did discuss briefly in session expanding the parking area exactly where you're talking about, and potentially doing a covered area. So that's all in transit right now.
Any other questions or comments? Or yes, Mr. Jones?
I share some of the concerns that have been expressed about spending this much money on this type of facility. And I'd just like to throw out an idea. Well, so you might ask, well, what would you rather spend the money on? And from my perspective, if there were something we could design, or a way that we could improve the district, in a way that you could say, we believe that building this is going to improve literacy and proficiency in the district significantly, I would say, build that, whatever it is, and spend as much as you want. If you have an expectation that it's really going to improve literacy, I think that's what your kids need. I think improving literacy will have side effects that'll see you graduate from high school easily. If you're sufficiently literate, graduating from high school shouldn't be a challenge. And it's true, most of our kids end up in high school and will see these nice facilities. And I appreciate that people put a lot of thought into them, and they really could be a diamond. But I think literacy has to come first. If there's any way to spend this money to improve literacy, I would be for that. Thank you.
Mr. Menuda?
So I really appreciate your comments, truly. I just recently spent a lot of time down at the Newburgh Armory with Mr. Kaplan and seeing what they've done down there. I also spoke with a lot of parents and people that were in that location. And one of the main concerns that was brought by those that I spoke with was sports programs, education, literacy. You have great sports programs, you have great athletes that can't read or read at a diminished level. And to that end, you know, I really appreciate your comments.
Okay, are we done with comments and discussion on this portion?
Thank you. So I want to draw your attention to the revised tax impact for option 1. So you'll notice that what's aidable is estimated higher than the original option 1, and that's because we're adding more classrooms. We took the pool away, so there were a number of decisions that were made that increased the percent that would be aidable, resulting ultimately in an estimated average increase of $17.91 a month. And that's based on homes assessed today at $250,000. What's also included in here is when taxpayers would be required to make those payments. And so based on the calculations, I'm not sure if you want to say anything about that, but according to what we have here, it's not until after the first 10 years. So this again is at our bonding capacity of $198 million for homes assessed at $250,000. And we increase the amount of this work that would be aidable based on decisions that were put on the table at our last committee meeting.
Any questions or comments on this section? Mr. Menuda?
So just for some transparency, we're going to have $198 million. If they could explain just a little more how that does not impact the taxpayers for 10 plus or minus years, as well as the increase per $10,000 of value. That way the taxpayers understand where this is coming from right up front, because regardless of what we do going forward, the money's the money. It does fluctuate regarding what we're reimbursed from the state, what we're able in certain aspects of it. So, but it's important to have full working knowledge of that going forward so that the public knows how we're doing this.
So the reason there's no tax impact for approximately the first 10 years is it's going to take a while to get this project started. You won't be actually issuing any debt for the project until we're estimating October of 2020, so that's your 2021 fiscal year, and then you'll be staying in bond anticipation notes for 5 years, and that will help, that will negate any tax impact during those years, because the thought is we will keep debt service at the current budgeted levels, and you'll be able to pay down debt service in those years, because while you're in bond anticipation notes, it'll be at something less than what you're currently paying for debt service, because you're having debt service fall off.
Mr. Stradine?
So the $17.91 per month starts 10 years after the project is completed, or whenever the payments start?
Yes, it'll start in...
Or is that $17.91 beginning from the day one of the
The
construction?
$17.91 is an average for the years. So those first 5 years, you're at almost no increase, and then it increases slightly thereafter. The first real impact is in the 27-28 fiscal year, and then it continues through 30 years total project of 2050-52.
How much is that per month?
So the $17.91 is an average. So if what you're asking is specifically each year going out, we're looking at a range of almost nothing for the first few years, and it does increase to about $25 in some of the out years. So we're looking at a total average of $17.91.
What about commercial properties? If you have a commercial property in the city of Newburgh valued at $500,000,
It's going to be, so There is no difference in your tax rate between your commercial properties and your residential properties. So if somebody has a business that's assessed at 500,000, you're gonna double that. Because it would be, twice 250.
Mr. Renner?
So, forgive me, that's not my understanding of taxation. Commercial properties are weighted a heavier number or percentage than residential taxpayers. So I know that from the local, county, and state, local and county level, but I'm not sure if it applies to state-funded projects such as school districts, but commercial properties are definitely weighted heavier than residential.
The district here, we only set one tax rate for each of the municipalities. So commercial properties and residential property have the same tax rate going out. What the assessor does with the assessment of the properties is something out of our control. But if you owned a business with a $250,000 assessment, you'd be paying the same rate and tax levy as the residential with the $250,000 assessment.
So just to be clear, so perspective from a district standpoint is that it's all equal across the board. However, it could change once it gets to the municipal level.
I don't believe so, because we only set one rate for the district. We have no homestead, non-homestead type of deal here in the district for school taxes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this section?
Okay, so that's a revised tax impact based on these current numbers. So again, just to highlight, $17.91 for option 1. Requires a simple majority if that's what the board wishes to ultimately decide on. So now we're going to go right into option 2. Mr. Dunn?
So what happened to South, this option 1? What's going to happen to that space?
So, South has been an ongoing conversation for the committee, as it was for the board when we presented last time. And so ultimately, we decided that based on our current structure, we know that upwards to 85% of middle school requests are for Heritage and not South. Looking at our idea of turning it into a community center, ultimately we felt that strengthening our partnership with the Newburgh Armory was probably a better route to take, given interest on both sides. So the board there is very interested in the district having more of a critical role. We certainly have interest in strengthening that partnership, and so it just made sense for us to go that route instead of making South an educational community center. We had allocated originally $3 million to offset some of the priority ones. In reality, that wasn't enough to address the priority 1 items there. And you heard from some of the other committee members that if there was a change in the use of the building, that there would be an obligation for the district to address the issues of that particular building. And so given that we're proposing a new high school building, that ultimately would leave north open. And what we're proposing in this option is to move the students from south to north. And that would take south offline.
Mr. Stradiner.
Have you calculated how much aid, if any, we would lose from the state? Dropping the building down?
So what we're thinking is that the building aid units would transfer to the new school. So you'd be closing South, but you're going to have, or not closing it, you'd be taking it offline, excuse me. And so those building aid units would be transferred to the new building.
We already have north, so you're not,
The new high school.
But it's, but I thought it was gonna be one campus. Is that gonna be considered a totally different building? Because right now you have North High and you have Main, two separate buildings in two separate locations. Now you're gonna have two buildings on one location. You're gonna get 8 for 2 buildings on one property.
Yes, because of the layout of the buildings, because of how you're teaching the students in the building aid units. It's not, you won't be losing any aid ability by taking the school offline. Because ultimately, you're going to have the same number of buildings that you're utilizing in the district.
You have that ready?
Not yet.
Is that ready?
Mr. Kern?
I think one of the questions he's asking is, by the time we take South offline, the indebtedness that the district has towards South will be paid, so there'll be no loss of building aid on South.
So
If we don't do anything at all in the district, by 2026, we will be debt-free.
So what happens to South?
You know, that's part of what needs to be decided. There are a range of different things that can be considered. Everything from selling to leasing to, I think it runs a gamut.
In option 1, have we made some accommodations for the students going from south to north, in as much as fixing up north? Is there some money allocated for that?
Yes. Yes. Close to $1 million in renovations. So, okay, so thank you, Mr. Stradine. So option 2, let's just start with identifying some of the key components between the two options. Right, so again, I want to highlight that for option 1 in the revised version, we added 2 additional buildings while making some additional renovations based on some decisions that were made. Option 2, in essence, would be including all the other buildings that are not included. And so here you will see HOH and Bombville and GAMS with additional renovations to both NFA North and Main. And then what you see ultimately in red is AC, and I just need clarification, is this AC for all the common areas in every building?
So the intent of this, in the budget number right now, is that all the schools would have air conditioning, but we have to put, as Mr. Menuda pointed out earlier, a little more study into the extent. So the goal is to get air conditioning in all spaces under this plan.
Mr. Stradine?
When you say air conditioning, do you also mean heat and cool?
Thank you. So let's take a look at HOH. And so what you'll see for the second option, we're not going to highlight what you already know in option 1. This would be a discussion around new items. So HOH would be one of those new items. You see the BCS items and then the scope of work with captions. So for HOH, it's addressing BCS items.
Questions or comments on Horizons?
Is there going to be some kind of method to determine that everything that you say you're going to do in a building gets done with the money that's approved by the taxpayers? Because at the last go-around, they said they were going to do all these items at Horizons, and then money got shifted. For whatever reason, I wasn't here at the time, so is there we're definitely going to get these items done, no doubt. And if there's any changes that have to be made, it's got to be public.
So,
really public.
I appreciate the concern, and what I can say based on what I know about that particular process is that the community actually is just approving an amount. The board holds the ultimate responsibility of deciding what actually gets done. So while I agree with you, it should be true to form, because we're ultimately saying this is what we want to do. And so I, in some ways, already have a slogan for when the board approves and the community approves. So that way we, one, are staying transparent, we're saying we're doing particular pieces of work that the community believes we're doing. But ultimately, the board has that responsibility of deciding what work actually gets done with that amount of money. And I would hope that the board would want to do the projects that ultimately the board approves and the community supported. But I think, just to be clear, this board would have that responsibility of deciding what actually gets done.
Mr. Menuda.
So I'm going to take one hat off and put another hat on for Mr. Strudiron, what he just mentioned. Yeah, that was a problem. The original scope of work in 2005 to 2015, that was only supposed to be a 3-year project for the initial bond. And then another bond got issued for another $75 million, which should have extended about another 3 years. So we ended up going out 10 years on a 6-year project. When you do that, you lose the ability year over year for cost escalation. So the same money you had today is not the same money you have tomorrow. You also saw a lot of maneuvering of a lot of different programs. There were spaces that were designed, sent to SED and approved, and shelved because the money got pushed elsewhere. So, yeah, I think that we owe it to the public, we owe it to our students and people that are paying the taxes here in this district to know exactly what they're buying their tax dollars. And so I'm not quite sure as to the regulations specifically that you had alluded to with regard to what the taxpayers approve. I don't think it's just money. I have a feeling it's money and program, but I could be mistaken.
So I'll just turn to my partner, Mr. McCoy. Was there anything I left out of that you feel is pertinent regarding ultimately who holds the responsibility?
Well, the program and the money spent is whoever's sitting on the board table at the time. You're correct.
So community approves the amount, certainly under the assumption of what concepts this board wants to see take place. And then it's our job to see those things through.
Any board members have any other questions or comments on Verizon's? Let's move on.
And again, I want to thank Mr. Strudiron for that question. All right, so Bombville would be another school in option 2. Again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but option 2 ultimately touches every single school. And so Bombville would be another school addressed in option 2. So here you'll see BCS items and the scope of work for Bombville.
Board members, questions or comments on Bombville? Yes.
I remember the proposal that you were going to have the bus entrance in the back of the building. Does that not happen in this plan?
No, this option only covers BCS items.
So the existing parent drop-off problem at Bombville is going to continue until there's some other construction that happens?
Yeah, we were looking at, possibility of shutting off the street. I don't know how much we would be able to make that happen. Cutting off 9W, it's a major road right now. We were dreaming.
Yes, Mr. Stern.
Have you looked into the possibility of taking the old building and expanding it, creating a shell, and expanding it out, and making that into a theater, and then having a walkway above the road, enclosed walkway to the existing school, so that when you have plays, you still have, you're not going to have these kids crossing the road, but you're going to have the expanded from the existing face of the brick out to 9W, expand the building that way. I don't know how far you can expand the building the other way towards the residential houses, but then the whole inside of the building would be theater with seating, and you can even have a balcony because you have that second level. Then you have a true auditorium, you have a space for meetings to occur, they wouldn't have to use the gym.
Yeah, I know that one of the issues there is there's no sewer system. But maybe the walkway,
But you could
I don't know.
extend, you could probably extend the sewer under that road, do a tie into the existing septic.
There's no sewer out there.
Septic, you pump it. Under the road.
I believe your existing septic is, you're at capacity, there's no room for expansion.
Well, that space would only be used in, at times mostly when the building is closed. You have night programs, so it's not like you're increasing the use, you're just shifting it from the gym to the space across the street.
Yes,
I
Mr. Mayor.
appreciate the innovative thinking.
I do too. We've been through Ballinville School for 15 years, more. The best thing that can happen with that school at this point is the people who would like to have it, and there's some guy from Texas who keeps writing about it. He should take the building, sell it to him for $1, and they can saw cut it and move it to a foundation of his liking on a different site, and that complies with Chevron compliance. Fact of the matter is, there's no water out there, there's no sewer out there, there's not enough parking out there. It's really site constrained, so I appreciate, and as an architect, I'm telling you, I'd love to see the building restored. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of taxpayer money to do so for something that we don't really get the benefit of, and we don't have the capacity of the ground area to do so.
Any other questions or comments about Ballinville?
Okay, so the next school is dams. So here you see again additional BCS scope of work items with corresponding pictures and estimated costs.
Questions or comments on Guinea Avenue School? Yes, sir.
I thought in the original proposal that GAMS was going to take some of the students from the RISE program. Is that still part of this plan? Or what are the RISE students going?
So because the pre-K center isn't being built, that is going to remain. So there really isn't space for the RISE students in this design.
Where are the RISE students going?
They would go to one of the facilities at the high school.
Any other questions or comments on GAMS?
All right, so NFA is also part of option 2 because of the additional renovations. So specifically here in this blue section. So flooring, ceiling, and some finishes to the existing library. I think Mr. Camano mentioned earlier that it's a phenomenal space, but really needs to be renovated. So we knew you were going to say that, and we wanted to include it.
Any other questions or comments on NFA Main?
And there's additional BCS work. On option 1, I believe it's 8 million. Yeah. Okay, so Ms. Maneo had mentioned, so what's going on with North? So in option 2, so again, just to be clear, the proposed idea right now is to transfer the students from South to North. And here we would look to do some BCS work.
Any questions or comments on North?
Just a general statement as far as moving south to north. Originally, the board had a consensus that south would remain at south. I believe it was unanimous. And both option 1 and 2 don't include south in any of the plans. So I think it would be important if the board at this time would take a consensus on moving south to north, because it's never been a consensus.
Okay. We can go around. Would you like to start, Mr. Stritter? He wants to take a consensus on moving south to north.
At this point, I would say no. I want to see South thrive. In the existing building that it has right now, it's not going to happen. So I prefer investing in the city of Newburgh in that area in the south side. So I think we have a perfectly functioning high school at North. There's no need for a new building at Main other than for programming, which is important. I understand that. But I would prefer to keep South at South, invest in South, and make it a jewel in that area.
Thank you.
Mr. Tabana? Put your mic on.
They can hear you. Speak loud.
Put your mic on.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Pass me on. I don't know what he's saying.
Ms. Manel, I don't know why there should be a consensus taken on this when this is a proposal and a workshop from the committee brought here. If we come up to a vote and someone doesn't like it, then they vote no. But to do a consensus now and piecemeal this, I think is not right.
Okay.
When it comes to our committee working as much as the committee has worked.
Can I just share what BCS priority 1 items for South would be? I mean, this is part.
Yes.
I'm sorry, so I'll take that back. So this was to answer a previous question that I believe Mr. Menuda and Mr. Stridiron asked regarding BCS items for the entire district would be a little more than $51 million. 51.5. So I wanted to make sure we share.
priorities?
Priority ones.
That's just priority one.
Priority one's construction cost only, that's not.
50-some million. Okay. And for all of them?
All priority.
All priority ones.
We don't have a number for all priorities.
No, I don't have that right.
So, Mr. Stritter, I'm going to agree with Ms. Prokosh because I think we empowered a committee to do their work. And their work was to make a decision about South. And so I think, for me, I'd like to respect what the work that the committee has put into this. And I think we really, unless you felt differently, you should have joined in on the committee.
I was told I could not join the committee. Specifically, the 3 members that were running for re-election were specifically told by the superintendent we were not allowed to join the committee, and I respected that. So I would have loved to be on the committee.
Okay.
I would have loved to know when the meetings were. And we had a discussion here at the board in public, and the attorney did state that those meetings should have been made public for viewing, not for participation, but for viewing. That has not been the case. So the board did take consensus. We were asked for consensus the first time for South. And it was unanimous. And there were people clapping that we were there saving South, at least for that.
For myself, my opinion has changed about South. Hearing the amount of money that it would take to make it a really good place for kids to learn. Not that it's a bad place for kids to learn, but to make it up to code.
But a totally new building. I'm not talking about keeping the existing building. I'm talking totally new building, investing in the south side of the city of Newburgh.
Mr. Nuda.
So, yeah, we did take consensus on South last time, prior board meetings, but the evolution of the committee and what we do at that committee, and I I don't think I've ever seen it closed to the public. So, I mean, come on board. It would be great to have you there. At least you could see what we have to do in the background. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes on, a tremendous amount of thought. And it's not like we just, said, what, should figure this out. That's not the case. It's a tremendous burden of money that's got to go into that building to bring it just to code and then actually make it usable. When we start taking a look at what our assets are in the other parts of the district, and that we can redistribute that to other buildings that we have because of our enrollment, and, please stop me if I go awry here. But all those items, it's not an easy decision, and the committee didn't have an easy decision in going in that direction, but for the amount of monies that would have been spent there, and what we're trying to do as a district as a whole. So therein lies some of the rub.
I think one thing that we can do better is to better publicize the meetings so that more people can come and sit and listen, as Mr. Stern suggested. But occasionally I go and sit and listen, so I sit in the back. Go ahead.
How does someone get on the committee in the beginning? Were they appointed? Was it board chosen? Who was on this committee?
So it was
I don't think anybody knows other than the committee members.
No, I was very clear. And so to your point, the decision, the recommendation was to have the chair and vice chair of buildings and grounds. That made the most sense. And they were two people who weren't up for re-election, and so their participation wouldn't have been haphazard. But these were two individuals who were part of a committee that ultimately has to see a good chunk of this work. And so, Madam President, I absolutely will communicate when the meetings are happening, so anyone who's interested could participate. And I just want to echo the point Mr. Menuda made. I shared with the committee last time, and I'll share it again publicly. I just respect the amount of perspective. This was in no way any form of groupthink. You had people really, emotionally sharing their feelings about various projects that we have. And ultimately, the committee decided that this was a particular direction to move in. We understood, we were quite aware of how our board and ultimately the community would feel about South. Absolutely, that's why it was so hard to come to this particular decision. But in the end, these are the two options that we're presenting to you. Nothing is formal at this point. I have not made a formal recommendation to the board. This is simply an opportunity to engage the board in a dialogue and get more input and feedback from you. And we'll take that back to the committee again and say, all right, based on what we heard tonight, what is the formal recommendation we're going to make? And as you can see from the last time, we added 2 more buildings to option 1 based on the conversation that was happening. And so we plan to do the same thing. We're going to take information back from tonight. We'll go right back to the committee. But I'll tell you that we have roughly a month and a half or so, probably more like a month, where you can kind of sit with both options. Raise more questions, be more critical, throw more ideas out on the table, and it's my hope in January that I do present to you a formal recommendation based on all of this collective input. And so I thank you. I thank you for being critical. I thank you for throwing your ideas out and ultimately helping us to refine both options.
So let's get back to Mrs. Zambito. Do you have a comment?
I just wanted to make a comment in general about the committees, all committees. As a board member, it's important for the entire board. We rely on the work of the committees to bring the important items, to the full board. That's their job. That's why you have the committees. We have to depend on the committees. They do all the hard work, or the individual committees, whatever it may be. And I know just for myself, I can't be, and at each of the committee meetings, and every single one of the committees. And so I rely on what they bring, each of the members and the chair and the board and the vice chairs of those committees. So they do important work.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on the North campus? Excuse me, North Middle School.
All right, so moving along, we kind of already talked about South Middle. At this point, our concept, our scope of work is to transfer the students from south to north. And so the tax impact of option 2, you can see here, even more aid, possible aid in option 2 than in option 1. Average increase of a little more than $19 a month with the same information that you saw in option 2. So for homes assessed today at $250,000 and no tax impact for the first 10 years. So financially, if you turn the page, you'll see a summary between option 1 and 2. I think I commend the committee because we were able to find a way to increase our aidability for option 1 higher than it was for the first time we came to you. So you see that at close to 63%, and then option 2, almost 74% of that work would be aidable. And then you can see the monthly impact in both options. Other than that, the other big difference is one requires a simple majority, the other requires a supermajority.
Mr. Menuda.
I want to emphasize this particular point to the public. $17.91 a month gets us what we need in option 1. For an extra, what's that come out to? A little over $1 more a month? $1.12 a month. All the students, the staff, and faculty get air conditioning. I think that's a pretty good deal.
Ms. Prokop.
And also, if I can remember correctly, when you go up to SED, there's a possibility of getting more aid too, correct?
Yes.
Eking out a little bit more.
I did want to bring this back because you had asked the question before about the aidability and using aid for South. Currently, when we're talking about the CTE and the new high school, I'm only showing 50% aid for that part of the project to be conservative. There's certainly the possibility that we're going to get higher aid. The reason your aidability is going up is because we're touching so many more buildings than just classrooms in those buildings. So that's how the aid is able to go up. And so we're certainly conservative in the estimate.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Strider.
Are there any proposed plans for Chestnut Street or West Street?
So in both of these options, no. We didn't consider making those 2 buildings part of this.
Any other questions or comments?
Should we? Certainly if that's what the board thinks the committee should go back and do, we could. But obviously, we would have to rework these numbers.
Mr. Menuda.
So just dovetailing that comment, for NFA West, I mean, that was completely renovated several years back. And then renovated, not just for NFA West, but prior to that, when it was at the elementary school. And then it was renovated again for NFA West. So that building's had all work up to it as far as I can tell. So doing more work at this point doesn't even make sense because it's all already been done. So that's that part of it. And then Chestnut Street, we haven't done anything with. It's been our facilities and maintenance building forever. Like to have, but not really in the program, I guess.
We try to stay close to as possible the educational spaces. So where we can improve programs, where we could upgrade facilities to improve, programs is kind of where we focused on, which is part of what we thought the board wanted us to do. So we didn't touch this building, we didn't touch Chestnut, and for the reasons you just highlighted, there wasn't really a need to touch West.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Okay, so, those are both options. You see the financial impact of both options. The committee will synthesize the information from tonight. If there are any additional changes, we will come back to you, the first meeting in January and share those changes. If there are not, if no changes are made, we probably will open the floor so that way you have some time. You'll have several weeks to kind of sit with both options, generate questions and comments. We'll probably use the first board meeting in January to open the floor for a conversation among the board. And right now, I'm shooting for the second board meeting in January to make a formal recommendation. So that's the plan at this point. So Madam President, that concludes my items for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. We're now at the section of the agenda for public discussion and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments that is posted next to the sign-in sheet. We have no one signed up, but is there anyone who would like to address the board on agenda items? Please come up and state your name.
Good evening, Bob Coletta, Windsor. I've been listening since you first proposed all of this, and I'm still confused. And I don't say that in criticism, because I'm sure a lot of work has gone into this. But if someone were to ask me in 5 minutes to summarize the importance of this program, I would say it's got too many moving parts to really understand clearly what it is you're asking me to vote on. If it's health and safety, which I assume are your priorities that you speak of, 1 through 5, why are you shortchanging yourself and not addressing all of them? That rationale has to be made very clear, and how you address the remaining ones has to be made very clear. So far, you haven't. You have competing interests. You have non-educational interests competing with educational interests you're setting aside. Every bond that I've experienced in this district and even in other districts always seems to have a sports project. Seems to be the way you market it, unfortunately. So why are you trading a track and stadium for a pre-K building when we all know pre-K is probably what this district needs more importantly than 8 tracks thrown around in a circle and 2,000 seats in a stadium? You can either build a building or repurpose a building for pre-K. Start there as well. I don't understand why you would split a library in a high school simply because the space is there. I mean, that's more of a, well, it's there, let's do it, rather than an educational one built on a solid library principle or guideline. I would think you'd want one state-of-the-art library, whatever size it takes, where students see it as a mecca to use. I think, again, as I said, those priorities 1 through 5 are not taking center stage after all the work and effort you went into identifying them. They're not going to get done by themselves. As far as the cost, I wish people would stop telling me it's only going to cost you the price of whatever. Because either I have to give up spending money on that, or it's just another cost on top of the movie ticket. And by the way, not including all the furniture, all the painting, everything else you said you're going to leave out to do later. So it's $1,791 plus all the additional materials we need to fill that space, as well as the people and the services needed to maintain them. That should be included. Ladies and gentlemen of the district, we're going to spend X millions of dollars, and each year you're going to have to spend another, whatever it is, to maintain that facility. Let's see the true cost. Treat it like a business decision, not as a political gimmick.
That concludes my item, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Fortune. We're going on to board committee reports. The library committee, Mr. Johnston.
Thank you, Madam President. There was a meeting of the library committee Wednesday, December 6th. The library monthly reports were reviewed. It was noted that among the adult programs, concerts and history events were very well attended. There was discussion about a possible update to policy regarding the locking of youth library cards for overdue items, and also discussion about the library's schedule and making an effort to be open on additional holidays. These topics are likely to be followed up on next month. Finally, the committee heard about activities in school libraries from Ms. Gilligan. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to curriculum. Mr. Tabana.
It was a pretty long meeting here, so we had a resolution to approve conference requests, field trips, new courses, and why don't you posted this, we'll have to read it all and get this over, it's so long. What else did we have? We had a resolution to authorize the superintendent to purchase sand supply for Vales Gate. A resolution to authorize the superintendent to purchase technology supply for Vales Gate. Resolution to superintendent to purchase lacrosse supply for Empire after-school program. And that was it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're going to move on to Buildings and Grounds Committee. Ms. Prakash.
Yes, Building and Ground, we met last Thursday. Very briefly, we went over the painting schedule that's going on right now, and I think they're at South High. We had an update on the elevator at North, which I'm glad to say is finally fixed and working. We had a facility use request, and we also had an update of the need for van drivers, and also we wanted clarification as to exactly what they would be doing. So that's going to be coming back to committee. Then we went on to Personnel Committee after that, and most of the stuff is on the docket tonight, but to give you a highlight, we went talk about appointments for homework help at Heritage, Schedule J appointments, 21st Century appointments, Empire after school appointments, and also we discussed the intramural. That's the intramural appointment that's going to be on the docket tonight. And the rest was done in executive session.
Thank you, Ms. Prakash. We're going to now move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Mrs. Felice.
Good evening, Madam President. Tonight I present items 7.1 through 7.15 as a consent agenda for the board's consideration.
Would any board member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, Mr.
7.3, please.
Ms. Prakash, did you?
Yes, I wanted one separate. I'm trying to find it. 7.7.
So let's look at all the items other than 7.3 and 7.7. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions for discussion? Yes, sir?
For discussion, or just comment, I would like to understand our conferences and the amount of time that goes into them, and that we are actually reaping the benefits from all of the people going to these conferences, because they're out of the room, out of the classroom at the time, depending on the position. So I really would like to weigh the balance as to, are we getting the value and reaping that value that we so badly desire by the individuals getting the additional conference help, and is that happening in the school? Is that clear?
Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. We have considerably cut back on the number of conferences. We're pacing ourselves with the way that we're presenting them to the board to truly evaluate during curriculum committee what is the value of the individuals attending the conferences. I can give you some examples this evening that, for example, we have an ENL teacher and an AIS teacher going together to a national conference. They would bring back information that would not only impact their school, but teachers servicing those subpopulations in our district. We're trying to maximize the information that is brought back. Currently, Dr. Padilla has put a procedure in place that anyone who goes off to a conference that costs above $300, those individuals are required to provide us with a summary, not only of the learning, but also the implementation, how they plan to provide value to the district.
So just to follow that up, and thank you, I appreciate the explanation, and I'm glad that you have that in place as far as the value is concerned. I guess my question goes to, as a registered professional in the state, I have to have a certain amount of credits every year, 12, 18 credits, depending on where I'm being registered. That's hours. So 12 to 18 hours a year I have to have. So I guess my question is, if as a professional registered in the state, and all the others that are, if those are the amount of hours that I have to have, how many hours are each one of these individuals putting in? And secondly, the inconsistency of the children being taught by these educators. They have a substitute teacher come in, so there's inconsistency there. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'd like to see, are we putting out too much? Make sense?
So I think that with regards to conference requests, you have to look at them individually. There are some that are for professional learning. There are some that are meetings. There are some that are retreats, and they all have different purposes. As long as they are planned, purposeful, and intentional, then I would definitely support them. So let me give you, for example, the team that I work with in the summer, we did a study over the course of the year of the capacity that we have to do our work and the gap in the capacity we have to be able to do our work. We needed to fill that gap. We identified 3 specific conferences that would be able to fill that gap. As a result of attending these, we are now able to do program monitoring and evaluation of different programs that are being implemented in the school district, and we're starting to reap the rewards of that, so that if we spend the money on something, is it giving us the value that we're looking for? One of the other areas is in professional learning. We're building our capacity around designing and developing systems. So my team is going to one conference and one in the future coming up in February, where we will learn how to create educational systems that work in school districts and in schools. Some of the work that we've already received, we've turnkey training for every assistant principal in the school district, so that they begin to learn and implement those things that we're learning. It's capacity building, if you ask me. It's how do we take where we are and then build for the future so that it's tied to improve student learning. And I think by doing it this year, this was the first year we did that on an annual basis. We really looked at what our needs were in order to support the school district as a whole, and we identified those conferences for the year.
Just to sort of round this out, if I might, I'm not challenging the need for coursework. That's furthest thing, education. Where my concern is that do we have too many hours away from the classroom for our students that are not having a consistent educator in their room, and weighing that cost versus the value of what we're gaining from some of these other items. That's what I would like to have as a member evaluate.
Any other questions or comments on these items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener?
Yes.
Mr. Sabano?
Yes.
Ms. Zambito?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Ms. Mineo?
Yes. We're going to move to item 7.3. May I have a motion, please? Questions or discussion? Mr. Johnston.
A couple of these items have names which are confusing and seem perhaps incorrect. And I'm wondering can that be changed, or can we leave that, or recommend that that be changed? One is the course titled Facing History and Ourselves, Crimes of Humanity. I think the expression that probably should be used is Crimes Against Humanity. And the website that seems to be the inspiration or the source for the resources for this course uses that same phrase. I think it changes the meaning undesirably to change that word. In addition, further down, the Web Design 2 courses seem to be entirely about programming in JavaScript and Python. So it's kind of confusing to call that web design. I'm not sure what would be the more fitting title for the course there, but it's certainly not web design. It's clearly programming, and the course descriptions don't seem to focus on web programming. Both JavaScript and Python are general application programming languages. And
So would you consider tabling this item?
yeah, and if there's no
For
hurry, perhaps.
to have send it back, so that, no? I'm getting a yes and a no.
If I may respond, we were seeking to get the courses approved at this time so we could prepare charting your course for our students and guidance counselors. We could certainly rename if that is the only concern.
Yeah, I did have another question, but it's probably, I don't think it would impede or prevent us from approving. I think for the Facing History and Ourselves, I think it clearly should be Crimes Against Humanity. For Web Design 2, I'm not sure what you want to call that, or if there's a reason that web design was chosen to be part of the name. Perhaps we can, if we come up with another idea, I think we could modify the resolution.
Yes, Mr. Tabano?
I was at the presentation with the teachers researched and named these courses. So, Mr. Johnson, that's your opinion. Let's take a vote on it and see what we think. I mean, the teachers, they chose the names and they did the research. I think that they had done their homework. And what's the difference? Well, we change the name or not? The same class, same course, the same curriculum. Why would it be Crime Against Humanity? Let's take a vote instead of trying to change the name and see what we all think of this.
So what you're doing, he's calling the question, is what he's trying to do. Okay, so that means we have to go right to a vote. Yes? No, not me then.
No, calling the question, we were happy to vote on that. So there's nobody, there's no formal motion on the table.
Okay. Yes, we have a motion.
Point of order. There's been no motion made by any member of the board to call the question.
Okay. So, yes, go ahead. What are we going to do then?
So
I need a direction.
having been involved in this stuff and teaching courses such as this, you're absolutely right. I think we also have to be careful as to how we put them together, because we want the students to sort of look at the course and the selection they're taking, and sometimes the name makes a difference for them. Clearly, it's not web design, it's programming. But maybe that's something that the committee thought of when they decided name. So
I was at the meeting, and I believe that they chose this, and Mrs. Felice, didn't they choose it because this is going to be one of the new pathways? And the pathway is called web design.
Yes, Madam President, that is correct.
So I think that was the reason that they used web design 1, 2, 3, because that's the new pathway.
I'd like to make a motion, we approve it as noted.
As it is. Okay. So we have that motion, we have a motion anyway, so roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Yeah, so there's already been a motion and a second on the floor on 7.3. Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Tabano?
Yes.
Ms. Ambito?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
We're going to move on to item 7.7. May I have a motion, please? Questions or discussion? Ms. Prokop?
Yes, I believe this, if I'm correct, this is, the supplemental instructional supplies is, for an after-school program is actually the purchasing of additional, iReady books, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we use iReady during the day. I see no reason why in an after-school program we're gonna be redundant with the use of the same, and it's iReady, so it's the same diagnostic after school. I'd rather see after school a purchasing of materials, other than, the, iReady books. And that leads me, to the point, and I just have to say this, that we have purchased iReady books for the district classroom set. Well, I was under the assumption that it was classroom sets. Now I'm hearing that it's just for students that are on 1 and 2. And I think that is unacceptable. When we agreed to purchase books, classroom set for each grade, it should have been done for each grade. If we don't have the money in CNI, which I understand, that you try to eke out as much as you can, then we have to go to our purse that we have and get more money to get every classroom with the iReady books. That was agreed upon last spring. So I would like this one, if we're going to do an after-school program, use something other than iReady. I don't care if we get books, which would be nice, or something like that, but not iReady books. So that's my statement on that.
Any other questions or comments on item 7.7? Yes, Mr. Stridarn?
When does this after-school program begin?
It has already begun.
What are they using now?
They're not doing test preparation. iReady would be the test preparation booklet. They're doing STEM, they're doing arts programming, Project Lead the Way.
So they do test prep during the day, and then using the same materials that test prepping during the day after school?
The same materials, but I am not certain at this juncture if it is the same scope and sequence. It could very well be that they're using different chapters of the book for after school.
Any other questions or comment?
Madam President, can I make a motion to table second?
Can you make a motion?
Point of order, that's only allowed, only board members can make that motion.
I'd like to make a motion to table this item.
Okay, roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Motion to table 7.7. Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
Mr. Tabano?
Yes.
Ms. Gambito? Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
That concludes our CNI items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Felice. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Mr. Kern.
Good evening, Madam President. Finance would like to present the consent agenda items 8.1 through 8.5.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Yes, sir.
What is the projected 2017-2018 budget surplus, if any?
That'll be out in the January projections when we do the end of the year. We'll have the projections for the balance.
Didn't we already have a projection from last month?
Yes, but we, end of the month is the halfway point of the year, and we have better projections. We just got the state aid release for the year that was done in the middle of December, so we're still disseminating the numbers that, and that will give us a truer picture of what we will have left over for 17-18.
So I can ask this question at the January 12th meeting? Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call, Mr. Clark.
Ms. Gambito?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
Ms. Maneo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
Mr. Tabano?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes the items for finance for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the HR agenda, I have items 9.1 through 9.5 for your consideration.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Ms. Prokash is looking to see if she wants to separate out any of the items, so just take a moment. Just a moment. It takes her a moment. No, not to bother a minute. That means everybody disappears. I didn't know my mic on.
Okay, never mind, I'm all right.
Okay, so we're going to take it as is. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Questions for discussion? Yes, Mr. Stein?
Regarding that at 9.4, Schedule J, is it possible that we can start the conversation of having a school newspaper at the high school level and possibly at the elementary and middle school level? Because I think it would help the students determine, their goal in life, is if they want to do journalism, or it helps with their writing skills, communication. So I don't know if we've ever had a newspaper, but I don't know how long it's been since we had one, but is that something that we could possibly plan for next year?
Do you want to answer that?
Yes. I think it's a good point. We used to have something like that in the district, so I just need a little time to resurface if that's a standing position or not.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Johnston? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener?
Yes.
Mr. Sabano?
Yes.
Ms. Zambito?
Yes.
Item 9.6 is for your information only. It's for those personnel who will be coming up for tenure. That concludes my items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. We're going to move on to the clerk of the board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the approval of the minutes from November 28, 2017.
Okay, we can have I'd like to have a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Menuda?
Yes.
Ms. Prokop?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener?
Yes.
Mr. Sabano?
Yes.
Ms. Zambito?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston?
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We are now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedure sheet next to the sign-in sheet. There's no one signed up, but would anybody like to address the board on non-agenda items? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Menuda? Yes. Ms. Prokop? Mr. Scrivener? Mr. Scrivener?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivener? Ms. Zambito? Mr. Johnston? Mr.
Yes. Thank you. Everybody have a happy holiday.